I remember being very curious about what direction Season 2 of The Last of Us was going to go in. Season 1, despite some alterations, still very much stuck to a similar sequence of events to the game, and that makes sense. It's one of the best reviewed video game stories ever made. They'd be foolish not to stick close to it. Season 2, on the other hand, is basing itself on a much more divisive game. Some people liked it, some people were okay with the concept but not the execution, and some people just wanted the entire product beaten with a golf club. So I didn't really know what to expect because there was practically no approach they could have taken without alienating at least some of the fan base. Like the transphobes, for example. Also, if my voice sounds different in these shots, it's because I'm sick. The marketing didn't give much insight about the direction they were taking, probably because even the basic premise is a major spoiler. I mean, it didn't outright lie about the plot, that was nice at least.
What the hell are you doing here?
You think I'd let you do this on your own?
Joel, please get up!
But from the perspective of someone who both really loved the game but was also open-minded to a different approach, I think I'm in a reasonable position to ask, how does it fare as an adaptation? Well, to start out with the most immediately obvious, much like the show's first season, the production values are amazing. The attention to detail in the set design is great at capturing the look of many of the game's locations, even very minor ones, and it goes a great way at elevating the show from a reasonable enough imitation of the game's universe to a lovingly crafted recreation. The season also does a great job at adapting the gameplay of The Last of Us into the show with a number of moments taken from the games without feeling like you're just watching a walkthrough. Instead, it takes advantage of the different medium by taking gameplay sequences and getting a lot more dynamic with elements like the cinematography and editing. Or, in the case of adapting less scripted sequences, the show still incorporates a lot of different gameplay mechanics without it feeling forced or unnatural. There's the obvious stuff to adapt like the mix of action and stealth, but also individual components like scavenging.
No pain meds!
Human shields, ammo consumption. The different types of infected that require different strategies to defeat. Even the listenability makes an appearance. One of the most overtly game mechanics in the series gets included in a way that's actually subtle and builds tension. It's also worth noting that the second season is up the gore a bit from the first, which, call me a psychopath, but I think it's a massive improvement. It's something that I felt was a bit lacking in the first season, considering it originally helped to drive home the brutality of the world these characters live in, and it's especially welcome in the second season given the more violent story. In terms of the way the show differs from the game though, much like the first season, the story is a lot more slow-paced than what it's adapting. Compared to the game, enemy encounters in the show are much fewer and farther between, which makes sense since the game has to accommodate for the fact that the player needs to be given something to do. The show, on the other hand, fills up that time by doubling down on the character interactions, and there are examples where that really works. One thing that the game's dabbled in is the concept of people attempting to find normality in a post-apocalyptic world. We see this with elements like the Fedra quarantine zones, Jackson, the wolf bases, as well as alluding to other examples like Ish and his sewer community. These were cases of people in this broken world that managed to come together and find some relative civilization and order, albeit to varying degrees of success and comfort. But it's also something that the game's only really explored through short segments and subtext in between long stretches of dilapidated wastelands, raider territories, and war zones. The show, particularly the second season, expands on this by dedicating a surprising amount of time to Jackson as a relatively democratic community that, sure, has to beware of danger, but also looks out for each other, offers sanctuary for outsiders, has normal jobs and infrastructure like construction, bartending, farming, electricity, and therapy, and even allows for games and parties. All of that while maintaining a legitimate political structure. Then in Seattle, you've got the WLF, which is obviously not as peaceful since they're in a war and are much more militaristic. But it does show a level of organized civilization that goes beyond bandit camps and survivors living off the land that you see in most zombie apocalypses. Even Fedra are depicted as much more than just nameless cookie-cutter stormtroopers, with this one scene of them joking with each other, which helps to show how even in this ruined world, people are still able to take joy and pleasure from things.
No one asked you, jizz boy!
Granted, what they're taking pleasure in is essentially police brutality, which is fucked up for sure, but it does also demonstrate that for a lot of people in this world, violence is something that has just kind of become normalized for them. Although in saying all this, there is one component in the story where I think de-emphasizing the action somewhat detracts from the point, and that's with Ellie's character arc. The plot of both this season and the portion of the game it's adapting is about Ellie tracking down Joel's killers for revenge, and slowly losing her sense of morals and humanity as she keeps persisting. Because the game necessitates a lot of action scenes for the player, we get a much greater sense of perspective of the toll this revenge mission is taking on Ellie. We see her living her peaceful, comfortable life in pursuit of Abby, who she has every right to be furious with, but doesn't really ever need to see again. I mean, it would suck that Abby just gets to do what she did and get away with it, but at least Ellie could still live her life. Instead, she ventures into a war zone where she's willingly putting herself through physical and emotional torture, getting shot, stabbed, beaten, drowned, and otherwise torn to shreds to avenge a man who, let's be honest, would be horrified to see her suffer like this. Not to mention how this journey eats away at Ellie's morality, with the fact that in order to reach the 8 people she has a vendetta against, she's killing dozens and dozens of strangers. Granted in self-defense, but she could also just cut her losses at any time and leave, so she's not exactly innocent here. The lack of action scenes in the show ends up meaning that Ellie's hands are not nearly as bloody this time around, and the horror of what she's putting herself and the world around her through is lost to a certain extent. I mean, in the game, Ellie gets her first revenge kill not long after arriving in Seattle, and then it's a pretty steady stream of bodies from that point onward. In season 2 of the show, she doesn't get her first non-infected kill until episode 4 of 7, and the first with any dramatic weight doesn't happen until episode 5. Speaking of characterization though, let's take a look at how each of them compare to the game, starting with Joel. It shouldn't be too difficult, it's not like there's a ton of screen time to judge. Much like the first season, Pedro Pascal does a great job of playing him. He captures the same restrained but still vulnerable vibe that Troy Baker displayed in the games, but he still manages to go his own way with it. One aspect I really like with him is that the show delves much deeper into the more domestic side of him living in Jackson, and so we see a lot more of him getting to be relaxed and happy, something that we saw a little bit of in the game, but not to this extent. And after 20 years of losing everything dear to him and constantly fighting for survival, it's genuinely nice to see him allowed to be at peace and living closer to a normal life than he ever thought he'd see again, to the point where he's practically unrecognizable.
Are you shooting monsters?
No.
Are you shooting monsters?
No.
You are, you're shooting monsters.
Abby is another character who we don't see a tremendous lot of in the show since they're seemingly leaving her story for season 3, but there are some fairly significant changes made. Not necessarily in terms of what happens, but more in terms of how it's communicated to the audience. In the game, the fact that Abby is out to kill Joel doesn't get revealed until she actually does, and her reasons for doing it don't get explained until about the halfway point. This is done because Joel's death is meant to catch you off guard, and the game initially wants you to be rooting for Ellie to get her revenge by giving you zero incentive to like or sympathize with Abby. It's only later on that you realize that she actually has very sympathetic reasons, since Joel killed her dad and ruined her life. And while the game still depicts what Abby did as evil and selfish, you can at least understand her perspective a little more and realize that as much as you've rooted for Ellie thus far, in reality, she's doing the exact same thing to Abby as Abby did to her, and for very similar reasons. The show, by comparison, plays its hand much earlier on, as the reason for Abby's vendetta against Joel is revealed right from the beginning of the season.
When we kill him, we kill him slowly.
It's something I'm in slightly two minds about. A lot of people really hated Abby in the game right from the get-go, which I'd argue is kind of the point, but it did make a number of players reluctant to grow attached to her later on. So it's possible that the show being open about her motivations right from the start would recontextualize things enough to where people would be a bit more open to her going forward. However, I would be lying if I said the story doesn't lose something by doing this. The game did a great job of putting you on Ellie's side right away and then slowly weaning you away from it as she loses herself and we learn more about Abby, and that gets a bit reduced in the show by giving so much information so early on. Still, there is also the fact that a lot of the audience, myself included, already know why Abby is doing what she's doing, so the slow reveal isn't there to begin with. From my own perspective, I think it's kind of interesting to see an alternate take where the story doesn't have anything to hide. For example, the way she actually confronts Joel plays out a little differently in the show. In the game, Abby tries to give Joel a piece of her mind before giving her golf club a piece of his mind. Joel very quickly shuts her down, though.
Why don't you say whatever speech you got rehearsed? Get this over with.
And then Abby just gets on with it because he's kind of taking the fun out of it. In the show, we actually get to hear what she has to say while Joel is forced to face the reality of what he did, something that in the game he mostly got to ignore from his victim's perspective until he died.
An unarmed doctor you shot in the head. That was my dad.
But even though Joel lets her get a word in this time around, the showrunners still have the courtesy to let him have his little moment against her.
Oh, it's funny. I have waited
No, just shut the fuck up and do it already.
Not to mention, the show does make an effort to still make her appropriately hateable. Even though we know why she's doing this from the beginning, her screen time focuses on her anger and not so much her sadness, so she's not too sympathetic early on. Plus, compared to the games, she's much more explicitly forcing her friends into going along with murdering Joel despite them clearly being uncomfortable with it.
I'm gonna give you one chance to tell the truth, Joel. If you do, I'll let her live.
Wait, Abby.
Shut up!
And speaking of uncomfortable, I love how the scene of her torturing Joel plays with your expectations if you've played the game.
You don't get to rush this.
The show builds up to this moment in a very similar way to the game, making you think that it's gonna cut to black, only to surprise you and show you every grisly detail.
You don't get to rush this.
It's an example of the show rewarding you for being familiar with the source material, and I really appreciate that. Granted, Caitlin Dever isn't as muscular as Abby from the game, which is a little weird since she's apparently one of the most deadly members of a huge militia group, but I can somewhat overlook it. Dina is someone who I don't have a ton to say about, as she's pretty close to how she was in the game, and Isabella Merced does a great job of playing her. The one thing I will say about her is that I really like the show's alternative take on Dina finding out that Ellie is immune. It did make me realize that in retrospect, the equivalent scene in the game was kind of glanced over. In the game, Dina notices that Ellie should be infected but isn't, Ellie explains herself, and then they just carry on their merry way. In the show, it's a way more dramatic moment of Dina believing that she's just lost the person she loves and is gonna have to put her down, while Ellie desperately tries to convince her against her own common sense.
You're gonna sit as far away from me as you want, and you're gonna keep that gun pointed on me. If I turn, shoot me, but I promise.
And that transitions into a scene of a relieved Dina revealing that she's pregnant now that Ellie will be alive to see it, and the two embracing each other, officially beginning their relationship.
I'm pregnant.
It takes a moment from the game which was serviceable and makes it an essential part of the characters' emotional journeys. Then there are characters who I would argue are just straight up better than they were in the game. Isaac, for example, is a character that I never really found too interesting in the game. I mean, he's the leader of this armed militia in the middle of a civil war, normalizing a culture of executions and torture, but also inspiring great loyalty from those in his command. And yet, for all we see of him in the game, which is not much, he basically comes off as just some asshole and is rarely shown doing much worse than any random enemy you'd fight during gameplay. TV Isaac, on the other hand, while so far he's had roughly the same amount of screen time as the game, he's utilized it a lot better. We get a better idea of how he's inspired so much devotion from his troops as we see that he used to stand up for what's right and taking down oppression by betraying Fedra, albeit in a pretty extreme way.
I didn't mean anything by it, Sergeant.
Of course you didn't, you're thoughtless.
You get much more of a sense that he genuinely was trying to fight for good once upon a time, and then over the years his followers kept looking to him for guidance, even as he let his violence get the better of him. Not to mention, the show is much more explicit about the level of violence he's capable of, the complete lack of regard he has for his enemies, and his complete disinterest in finding a peaceful solution or common ground with them.
You broke the truce.
Because you broke the truce. Because you broke it, because we broke it. I'm not playing your little chicken and egg games today, Scar.
All of that makes him way more threatening than anything we ever got to see from him in the game, and it's nice to see Jeffrey Wright being given a version of this character that he can actually sink his teeth into. Then there's Jesse, who I also never really had strong feelings on before. Jesse in the game is fine. He serves his purpose decently enough as someone for Ellie to interact with until his death, but I never found him all that engaging as an individual. Fast forward to the show, and holy shit, I actually find Jesse interesting now, and all because they expanded on the aspects of his character that the game had already established. The show delves much deeper into the fact that Jesse is the father of Dina's baby, when in the game it felt more like it was the case because the baby had to come from somewhere, and it's obviously not going to be Ellie. Dina even says so herself.
Don't worry, it's not yours.
The show ends up using this as a source of conflict, with Jesse being rightfully angry with Ellie for putting herself, Dina, and now his unborn child in serious danger by pursuing revenge, forcing him to risk his own life to save them.
So how about we skip the apologies and just go find Tommy so I can get us and my kid the fuck out of Seattle?
And not only that, the show even builds on the conflict between himself and Ellie that was there in the game, with the scene of them debating whether to hunt down Abby or rescue Tommy. Except, while in the game, this was just a mildly frustrated disagreement. In the show, it's a frantic and heated argument between two friends as every decision they've made in the story gets interrogated and challenged by the other as their friendship tragically starts to fall apart.
Because everything you do for you.
You let a kid die today, Jesse. So don't look at me like you're better than me, or like you'd do anything differently if you were in my shoes, because you're not, and you wouldn't.
And then there's Ellie. And this is probably going to be my most controversial take of the video, so here we go. In my opinion, Bella Ramsey's performance is fantastic. Yeah, it's different, but it still feels like Ellie, at least to me. She captures the same quirky, kind of crass and morbid sense of humor that the games depicted her with, and her more emotional moments, while they feel different from Ashley Johnson's performance, they're not bad by any means. For example, looking back at Joel's death scene, she really sells the crying desperation begging Abby to stop.
Please, no, please don't do it. Please don't. Please don't do it, please.
Then that sadness very naturally transitions into rage as you see the first glimpse of what Ellie is going to turn into going forward.
You're gonna die! You're all gonna fucking die!
And then the scene ends with her in Joel's body, her face a mix of sadness and pain. That's a lot of emotion to convey in a short space of time, and Bella Ramsey pulls it off brilliantly as far as I'm concerned. The scene of her leaving therapy, claiming that she's okay only for her expression to change to unhappiness when she's out of sight, is really subtle and effective. Or if you want to compare her to Ashley Johnson from the game, take the scene of Ellie interrogating Nora. The way Ashley Johnson performed that scene in the game was very hardened and conditioned to violence.
Because I can make it quick. Or I can make it so much worse.
Bella Ramsey, on the other hand, plays the scene with a lot of anger instead building up inside, giving less of a calm and calculated approach, and more like she could explode at any moment. She sort of looks less obviously angry, but the intense stare she gives Nora throughout the scene says a lot. It gives the impression that she badly wants to kill Nora right then and there, but is making a huge effort to hold herself back. Oh, and I also just really like this line delivery.
If you'd rather let the men handle it.
Comparing Bella Ramsey to Ashley Johnson, though, leads into the biggest difference between these two versions of Ellie, that being that this version of the character is a lot more impulsive, and it's a decision that I'm on board with for a few different reasons. Firstly, no matter which version of the story you're looking at, going on this revenge mission at all is reckless, let alone sticking with it once she sees what the odds of survival are, so it's not that big of a stretch to characterize her this way.
But what we're doing is reckless, so kind of a wash.
Secondly, it adds a lot to the relationships between herself and the other characters. There's the much needed conflict to her relationship with Jesse, like I said, but that also extends to the rest of Jackson. In the game, Ellie leaves Jackson without making a huge fuss over it to the rest of the town. In the show, however, there's a whole town meeting where she asks for over a dozen people to come with her to avenge Joel out of a sense of community.
Please. Do what it takes to see that justice is done.
She isn't successful because, frankly, the town has more to lose than to gain, but at the same time, it comes across as a genuine appeal for help for the community that she cares about. Contrast that with the final episode, though, where she says this.
It wasn't in the best interest of the community.
Fuck the community!
This is basically a confirmation that as much as she wants Jackson to think that she's acting selflessly, and probably believes it herself to some extent, she's really only thinking about her own grief. It does a good job of building on Ellie's obsession from the game, while still not making her unlikable. She still has people that she cares about and would go out of her way to protect, and at certain points realizes when she's gone too far. One particularly significant example I noticed is when they adapt the scene of Ellie killing Mel only to discover that she was pregnant. In the game, it plays out pretty much how you'd expect. Ellie kills her, then sees the bump, and she's devastated at what she's just done. Very effective, but also pretty straightforward. The show thinks outside the box a little more, with Ellie realizing as Mel is bleeding out and Mel begging her to try and save the baby.
I only have 30 seconds. Get the fuck over here, please, please, please.
It's a compelling moment where Ellie is forced to confront the person she's just wronged as they put their differences aside to try and fix her mistake. But they're ultimately not able to, and Ellie has to contend with the fact that not only did she kill this person, she also let her down trying to make it up to her. Having said all that, I'll admit that I wouldn't consider this season better than the game, or even just the part of the game that it's adapting. Mainly what it comes down to, like I said, is how the much more shallow death toll affects Ellie's character arc. It doesn't ruin it, but it does remove a lot of the intensity from the original story, to the point where if you don't like this season, I can understand why, and I think the season really could have benefited from being a lot more dark and visceral in general. Still, for what it's worth, I'd say this is a pretty solid adaptation of the game, and I will be there when Season 3 kicks off. At some point. Speaking of which, for those of you who thought that Bella Ramsey couldn't pass for being 5 years older in Season 2, be prepared. My own concern is that by the time the show finishes adapting Part 2, she is gonna look 5 years older. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters Heather Reed, Zelda, Moon Goddesses, Blueberry Cello, Seth M, Chris Spicer, Jacob K, and Bluey. Thank you so much for the support. If you'd like to see your name in the credits, along with early access to scripts and videos, as well as exclusive unused video thumbnails, or if you'd just like to chat with me, consider supporting me on Patreon for just $1.50 a month. The link is in the description.